Hello. Today we're going to be talking about three different types of virtualization software that are currently available in industry and try and figure out which one might be best for you. So to begin our conversation, I think it's first important to recognize and define what exactly we have in terms of the various options that are available. So the first thing to set sort of a baseline on is if you watched our previous video on VMware basics, you know that the basic role of virtualization currently is that it allows for the consolidation of hardware into much larger servers, thereby reducing both your physical footprint as well as potential savings in terms of how much it costs you to have those servers up and online month over month, year over year. Now, to begin our discussion on the three different virtualization platforms we're going to be looking at, we're going to be specifically describing these and comparing these through some factors such as licensing, the overall cost for the individual platforms, how mature their feature sets are, and also how these individual platforms might fit your particular environment compared to the other options. Something else to mention here as well is that each of the three different platforms we're going to be talking about, and those specifically are VMware, Proxmox, and Hyper-V, we're going to be looking at each of their individual philosophies in terms of their focuses on the products that they offer and how they support them. Depending on your organization's particular needs for virtualization can help to determine which of these particular platforms is going to be best for you. So to begin, we're going to be talking about VMware, which is the current industry standard for virtualization. I do want to quickly point out here that VMware vSphere refers to their entire product category, their entire product family. So it doesn't refer to one specific technology, it refers to all of them. So when we talk about VMware in particular, or more specifically VMware vSphere, there are a couple of points that are very important to highlight. So the first is that VMware's vSphere suite is well known for being very stable and reliable, especially for large enterprise virtualization needs. The vSphere underlying technologies do support many critical, business critical, and potentially globally critical workflows throughout the globe. One of the main, or one of the most noticeable benefits of, or advantages of vSphere is in its comprehensive feature list and technology list. So VMware integrates very well with backup and monitoring and storage tools, and they have their own proprietary options for each of these different categories. One of the other well-known benefits to, or advantages to VMware is their support and their training curriculum and certifications. Finally, VMware's user interface compared to the other options we're going to be talking about is generally going to be the most refined and will give a very positive user experience when managing an environment that is run by VMware. It wouldn't be enough to just simply talk about the advantages of VMware. There are a couple of disadvantages that we do have to be mindful of as well. The most important one is that recent changes have made VMware licensing quite expensive, and there is less support for perpetual licenses, meaning that each month that you have VMware up and running, you're going to be paying a subscription cost for that. In addition to just simply the costs involved with subscriptions, VMware also runs on very proprietary software and algorithms, and this can sometimes make it very difficult to move to a different provider if you're deep into the ecosystem, because there is not a straightforward way to directly convert from a VMware virtual machine into another. On top of the costs and the overall proprietary software that is used, many of the tools that are available inside of a VMware infrastructure or enterprise are going to have complexities and knowledge that is required to use them effectively. Now, if we look to one of the next virtualization platform, that would be Proxmox. Now, Proxmox has been around for quite a while, but recently we start to hear more about it because of, again, some of the pricing complications that have arisen through or from VMware. So with Proxmox in particular, you're going to find that the costs are generally going to be much more attractive, and in many cases, you're not necessarily going to be giving up a ton of features that you may be used to seeing through VMware. In addition to that, the Proxmox virtual environment also offers slightly more compatibility with open standard virtual machines, specifically the KVM virtual machine or LXC containers. Both can be installed on top of Proxmox. If you compare this again to VMware, where you have to have a very specific format that is developed and owned by VMware, Proxmox allows for a much more diverse collection of virtual machines or containers to be installed on top of it, so you're not locked into just one proprietary format like you are with VMware. Probably the biggest advantage with Proxmox is the integrated management functionality that it has. So with VMware, if you have multiple individual nodes, you can certainly log into each individual node and manage the virtual machines that are present there. If you wanted to have a single interface to manage those individual nodes, VMware absolutely offers a solution for that, known as vCenter, but that is an additional cost and additional licensing that you have to pay for. Proxmox does things a little differently, where each individual node is basically functioning not only as a management portal for its own local resources, but you can also connect and link up individual Proxmox nodes together, and you can log into any of these nodes user interface or management portal and manage any other node in the system, not just the local one. And then finally, with Proxmox, it's built on top of Linux and offers a much more transparent underlying operating system than, once again, if we were to compare to VMware or to Hyper-V. Now, when it comes to the disadvantages for Proxmox, there are a couple. The most obvious one is the smaller commercial ecosystem. And basically all this means is that Proxmox has not had the same reach as VMware has had for the last number of years. So Proxmox does not have the same, or more to the point, it has fewer third-party vendors and less certified integrations compared to other options like VMware. Depending on your particular exposure and comfort with Linux, Proxmox could be a bit of a learning curve to not only understand the underlying virtualization software, but also Linux itself. So generally speaking, Proxmox is going to have a steep learning curve for administrators who don't have good Linux skills. And then finally, the last point that we'll mention for Prox is its UI is not as refined as, again, competitor like VMware. Okay. So the last hypervisor, the last virtualization software that we're going to be looking at is Microsoft Hyper-V. Now, in sort of a similar way to Proxmox, Hyper-V is not as refined as, say, VMware when it comes to various components and features. However, where Hyper-V tends to lead the pack in particular is its integration within a Microsoft ecosystem or enterprise. So if you have a lot of Microsoft or Windows-based installations, Hyper-V can be very easily adapted or installed or utilized to manage those Windows-based nodes or objects. Similarly to both Proxmox and to VMware, it does offer similar reliability and high availability solutions, things like live migration, failover clustering, and disaster recovery options. But once again, keep in mind that Hyper-V in particular tends to be much more focused on Windows or Microsoft-based environments as opposed to those that might have Linux. And then the last thing for Hyper-V is that it does integrate quite easily and seamlessly with Microsoft Azure. So if you already have a cloud footprint that you are utilizing, you can integrate Hyper-V with that Azure cloud much more straightforwardly than with, say, Proxmox or with VMware. Now, in terms of the disadvantages for Hyper-V, as you can probably guess at this point, you're not going to have the same depth and the same complexity of features when you compare it to, say, VMware. So in particular, Hyper-V doesn't handle things like automation and software-defined networking quite as well as VMware or even Proxmox does. Generally speaking, you're also going to run into not necessarily a total breakdown, but you're going to have a much harder time using Hyper-V to virtualize, say, a BSD or a Linux-based environment. It can be done, but you might notice that it won't work as well as it will with a Windows-based environment. Kind of taking from VMware a little bit, Microsoft also has much more complex management tools that are used to manage its various functions and features. So you have, instead of basically a single user interface like you do with Proxmox, with Hyper-V, you do have different management tools that are all going to need to be used to manage the Hyper-V environment. And while the initial setup cost for a Hyper-V environment is not going to be too high, if you begin developing the infrastructure more and more, you can get to a point where Hyper-V can be quite expensive to manage day in and day out. So if we're going to put this all together, and we're going to look at sort of the high-level benefits to each of these different solutions, VMware's main strength lies in its current reach within the field, within the ecosystem. It also has quite a bit of advanced features and scalability that is available to it that can make it much more attractive if you need those advanced features or high amounts of scalability. However, its biggest downside is the current costs that are needed through subscription to keep the software licensed and current. Proxmox, on the other hand, sort of splits the difference between VMware vSphere and Hyper-V. It tends to be a little cheaper than VMware is, and it offers reasonably similar features and capabilities, but you may run into a bit of a problem in terms of the day-to-day management if you do not have Linux skills, knowledge, and talent within your team. Finally, with Hyper-V, tends to be or can be a very good choice if you run primarily inside of a Windows-based environment, but you may lose access to some particular features, capabilities, if you're coming from either VMware or from Proxmox. So trying to choose the right platform here is all going to come down to what are your specific needs and what are you looking to get out of your virtualization suite. Generally speaking, VMware is going to be best used by large enterprises who want the absolute most amount of features and capability that's available without focusing too much on the underlying costs. Proxmox suits those businesses, small, medium, or large, that are more focused on the month-over-month budget that is required to run the software. And Proxmox itself does offer, again, a similar feature list to VMware for a little bit of a more attractive price. And then finally, with Microsoft Hyper-V, it fits into Microsoft or Windows-based environments significantly better than either Proxmox or VMware. However, you do have to keep an eye on the potential costs that are associated with developing out that environment. So the best platform that is going to depend entirely on the size of your business, what particular features you're looking for, and what your focus on how much it's going to cost is going to be. So I'd like to thank everybody for watching our video. If you haven't seen any of our other videos on our YouTube channel, please go and check those out. And we will see everyone in the next one.